Hello, and welcome to another episode of Gilmore Glahn. Today is Tuesday, April 7th, 2015. I'm John Gilmore. Bill Glahn is on assignment making sure that local Minnesota media ignore important stories so they can eventually be covered by the national or British press. With us today is William Dembski, a well-known thinker in the field of intelligent design and related issues concerning the origins of the species, to use a phrase, and evolution and the evidence of design in nature. Bill and I have known each other since 1999. Apparently, Bill, we were once younger. Welcome to Gilmore Glahn.
Great to be with you, John.
Bill is a senior fellow with Seattle's Discovery Institute and a research scientist with the Evolutionary Informatics Lab. Dembski is a leading theorist for intelligence design and has published articles in mathematics, engineering, philosophy, and theology journals, and has edited or authored over 20 books. The Design Inference, Eliminating Chance Through Small Probabilities, is the first book on intelligent design published by a major university press. He founded the first intelligent design think tank at a research university, Baylor University's Michael Polanyi Center. He lectures widely on intelligent design and has appeared on various radio and television programs, including ABC's Nightline and Jon Stewart's The Daily Show. Bill, you have a relatively new book out called Being as Communion, and I was wondering if you could tell our listeners here in the Upper Midwest what that book involves and how, if at all, it furthers your previous research and your previous thinking, your previous publications, which we'll return to after we deal with the most recent work of yours.
Right. Well, I came to this discussion of intelligent design as a mathematician trying to understand patterns in nature that point to intelligence. And this is actually a pretty old notion. I mean, Claude Shannon, who's probably regarded as the founder of modern information theory, he was thinking in terms of the transmission of intelligence. I mean, that's how he even put it about information. So these patterns, when we look at Mount Rushmore, we see a pattern there that tells us there's an intelligence behind it. On the other hand, if you look at the faces of the mountains next door, those will look like the effects of wind and erosion. No intelligence, as far as we can tell, that's responsible for the patterns there. So we have these basic intuitions about patterns that are the result of intelligence, and then patterns that, for all we know, have no intelligence source. And when you start looking at patterns, well, how do those patterns get there? And information, the idea is putting form on things. And so this project of intelligent design, developing statistical methods for identifying intelligence, led very naturally to the idea of information, tracking information, what is the sort of information that's required to make evolution work. So that was, as it were, a problem logically downstream from my initial work on intelligent design. And then the question arose subsequent to that, well, what does the world have to be like if information and intelligence are fundamental? And the problem is that the academic world and the intellectual world in the West is overwhelmingly materialistic. And it's really hard to get information and intelligence in there. In a sense, information becomes a byproduct of matter and the way it's structured, but it's not something fundamental, something that's downstream from matter. But a number of theorists have, in the last 20, 30 years, been exploring the possibility, well, what if information is in fact more fundamental than matter? And so that's the sort of problematic, the issue that I'm dealing with in that book. So it's the subtitle of Being as Communion is A Metaphysics of Information. So it draws on science, but it really is more a philosophical work. It draws particularly on my work with the Evolutionary Informatics Lab, some basic theorems in the spirit of these no free lunch theorems or conservation laws of information, which basically says that information cannot be, the sort of information that we see, especially in life, can't just be created by random forces, that basically it has to be drawn from another source, and as you go back, try to trace the chain of information, the information that needs to be accounted for becomes worse and worse. In a sense, there's no free lunch with information. That's the great fallacy, in my view, with evolutionary theory, that it argues that you can basically get information from nothing. The idea with evolution is that you explain complexity in terms of prior simplicity. It's not a great feat of evolutionary theorizing to explain how cave fish lost the use of their eyes and therefore now only have eye nubs. That's a case of devolution. It's a case of information loss. The question is, how do you get those eyes in the first place? That's an increase in information. And I would say the great fallacy of Darwinian evolution is to think that that information can be accounted for in terms of some prior simplicity. And the results that my colleagues and I have been arguing for mathematically is that, in fact, the information problem intensifies as you try to account for that information responsible for the eyes. It's even a bigger information problem. And there's some good mathematics, and we've got some peer-reviewed publications that argue that.
That's fascinating, Bill. What would your strongest critic say in response to your work, such that Darwinian evolution, natural selection, random mutations, the standard biological and materialist approach to our world, which, as you know, I don't need to tell you, is pervasive in our culture. What is their strongest critique of your thinking, and how do you address that? In other words, if you're positing that as you go further back, information becomes I don't know if you use the word more complex, but certainly harder to account for under the standard rubrics. A, do you have a solution to that? And B, whether you do or not, what's the response to this from the establishment?
Sure. Well, I mean, the results are that we've proven. I mean, they're well established. I mean, these are mathematical theorems that it shows that the information problem intensifies, and so what you have is a regress, and the question is, do you have to explain the regress? Where would it end? And we would argue that, in fact, intelligence creates information. We've got good evidence for that, and that's where ultimately it goes. But as a purely scientific question, you have this information problem that just intensifies as you backtrack the causal story. So the question then is, which you raised is, well, what's the best response to it? I don't think there is really a best response. I think there's, in the current cultural climate, I think there's one that ends up being effective, which is just, there's got to be something wrong with the mathematics because we know that evolution works. So there's something that's being missed by by the way you're modeling search, evolutionary search in particular. The problem, and you can actually find this if you look, my old physics advisor at University of Chicago invited me in August to speak at a seminar at the University of Chicago, and that's been posted on YouTube, so you can find it if you just look under my name, Dembski, and Kadanoff, Kadanoff.
If I can jump in, Bill, listeners should know that at the time that this took place, of course I was following it in real time, the reaction was the barbarians had been let inside the gates of the city. It was the end of Western civilization as we knew it. It was the end of the scientific method. It was the triumph of some sort of vague theocracy.
Right. Apocalypse around the corner. I mean, that's
yes.
What's,
but for listeners who are just becoming acquainted with you, it's difficult to overstate how, at least in my view, Bill Dembski, unhinged that reaction was. I thought it was astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it wasn't universal. I mean, there's some, I had some nice interactions, but Jerry Coyne in particular, who's an geneticist there and has a blog, Why Evolution is True, he was, I think, contacting provost, I don't know if it's the president. The president, by the way, of University of Chicago was one of my former math teachers when I was a graduate student there back in the 80s. But
he knew you were a bad seed way back then, Bill.
But anyway, to come back to your question, I think the response is just to say there's got to be something that's missing from this model of search. My response to that is that this is a very, very general formulation of search. It really encompasses anything that computer scientists and mathematicians mean by search. And if you're going to say that it doesn't apply, then basically you don't have a theory of evolution. I mean, if you can't even in broad strokes characterize it as some sort of stochastic process or search in this broad sense, I think then you're mystery mongering. And so that's where I really left it in that talk. And Leo Kadanoff agreed with me. He said that the ball is in your court, evolutionists, to respond to this. So I think it's show that these methods really don't apply. And the fact is, I mean, the very notion of an evolutionary search, I mean, this is not something invented by intelligent design theorists. This is a notion that evolutionists have pushed. So it's so I don't think I'm doing anything untoward or sneaky here. It's just these methods apply, and there's a real information problem, and that's why Bob Marks, my colleague engineer at Baylor University, we call it the Evolutionary Informatics Lab. I mean, the adjective there is evolutionary. The noun is informatics. It's information. Information is required to drive the evolutionary process. The Darwinian thinks that Darwinian selection, natural selection, is able to create information, and our results show that that can't happen.
Then to do violence to the sophistication of your work and Professor Marks and other good men and women in what I'll just say is the design field generally, at the risk of doing violence to it, then do you simply premise that information in all of its variety and multiplicities was or has been pre-existing since, let's go with something everybody knows about, the Big Bang? In other words, was that information encoded, or was to move into physics for a minute, was it embedded in the structure of the universe such that as it developed, it would be found and utilized, if I'm making sense?
Yeah, you are. I mean, it's basically you're saying, I mean, if the information problem intensifies as you track back causally, then where did it ultimately come from? Where did it ultimately reside? And I think you've got two options. One is that it was there in the universe from the beginning, which suggests some sort of intelligence, perhaps naturalistic or immanent intelligence in the universe, and that would be, I think, more compatible with a pantheistic notion. But the thing is, in our experience, intelligences create information. I mean, William Shakespeare puts ink to paper, and there's some novel information, and it's so intelligences create information, and so an alternative would be the more Judeo-Christian ethical monotheism approach, which would say, that the information ultimately traces back to a transcendent creator God. So that would be an option as well. I would say intelligent design as a scientific theory really cannot distinguish those two, and that's just fine. I mean, because intelligent design is not principally or even peripherally, I would say, a theological position. It's a scientific position with theological implications. And for that reason, some years back, the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies invited me to speak there, and it was a very congenial event. I mean, they were quite open to intelligent design, and because, I mean, the idea that there's a purposiveness or an intelligence behind the world and that there could be evidence for that, I mean, that's not a foreign notion to most people. I mean, most people historically have believed that there's some sort of intelligence behind the world. I think the sort of materialistic atheism that we confront these days is really an anomaly, historically speaking, and yet it has become extremely powerful in the intellectual and academic world.
I'm fascinated to hear you say that intelligence design is primarily a scientific endeavor, mathematical endeavor, multidisciplinary scientific endeavor with theological overtones, because I know from having known you personally that was a long struggle, that for the longest time intelligent design was dismissed as creationism and lab coats. And so it seems to me that probably much to their dismay, the materialist advocates, the Jerry Coynes of the world, and Richard Dawkins and so forth. Although I had to laugh the other month or last year, I saw E.O. Wilson refer to Dawkins as not a scientist but a journalist. I thought that was rather amusing. But even giving it an imprimatur, if you will, of scientific credibility and bona fides has been a long time coming, has it not?
Well, I think in my view, in my approach to the problem, I think it has been a scientific endeavor, and yet I think there's been a lot of conflation with theological issues. I mean, one problem I think is that intelligent design is not going to get NIH or NSF funding. So where is it going to get funding? Well, largely from conservative Christian groups, as it has turned out, that sees some theological and cultural mileage as being gotten out of intelligent design. That's one reason I ended up teaching at conservative theological seminaries. That was about the only place where I could get a job. As it is, I have a theological background and an MDiv degree from Princeton Seminary, so that's what allowed me actually for a number of years to put bacon on the table. It's because my academic career in the secular world had gone down the toilet once I was publicly associated with intelligent design. So, but the thing is, whereas the materialists have been dead set against intelligent design, I'm not sure that the fundamentalists and young Earth creationists have helped our cause that much either, looking back now, because it seems that they have, to some degree, also turned against intelligent design because it's not offering them the cultural and theological mileage that they would like to get out of it.
That's interesting. It's not, in one sense, pure enough?
Not pure enough and doesn't go far enough. I mean, because they really want a Genesis literalism in which the world is created in 6 24-hour days and where the science backs that up.
Oh, Lord, right.
Intelligent design is at best agnostic about that, and most of my colleagues would say, standard geology and cosmology is just fine, as I am.
Right. Just so there's no misunderstanding, it's the official position of the Gilmore Glahn podcast that the Earth is not 6,000 years old.
My position too.
Right. As you said, just to make it explicit. Yeah. Something that I was reading in an interview that you had with a website called thebestschools.org, and it was fascinating. Before we went on air, I said, there were things I learned about Bill that I hadn't known over going into a decade and a half or more now of knowing him, both professionally and as a friend. What was interesting, though, I think for purposes of the podcast, Bill, was that you referenced or intimated that even theistic evolutionists will have problems with you in an intelligent design. And I thought that was interesting, given that I think our audience can understand that theistic evolutionary supporters say that standard operating procedure, neo-Darwinianism, is completely compatible with the Christian understanding writ large of creation and of a divinely ordered world, et cetera, et cetera. Where would there be something within intelligent design that would be problematic for those people?
Yeah. Theistic evolution, I mean, the adjective there is theistic, so I would say the emphasis is on evolution, and it's not just any form of evolution. I mean, if you think that God is involved in the evolutionary process, and the evolutionary process actually gives evidence of purpose or design, that would be an intelligent design view. One of my colleagues, Michael Behe, he takes that view. I mean, basically, the design process works through evolution, and Darwinian and other materialistic processes are inadequate to explain what we see in biology. But the theistic evolution, as the term is typically used, refers to a position in which evolution takes a purely materialistic form. So the science appears purely materialistic, and yet that's God's way of working. So it's kind of a kludge, of a theological position and a standard materialistic scientific position. And I would say the theistic evolution position, I mean, it's very dominant in especially the Christian Academy, the CCCU, Council of Christian Colleges and Universities. I mean, I couldn't get a job at most Christian colleges, given my views, because they take this theistic evolutionary perspective. So I mean, it's kind of strange. I mean, you've got the materialistic evolutionists who are against us because we're supposed to have the science wrong. The theistic evolutionists typically will say not only do we have the science wrong, but we're also theologically suspect because any theology worth having has to make its peace with Darwin and evolutionary theory. I mean, in fact, I heard one fellow who was at the time head of the Biologos group, this was Francis Collins's theistic evolution group, saying that this is a missional issue for him. So the Christian community has to get on board with evolution because that's the only way we can have credibility and speak the gospel to this generation. So I'm on the outs with the theistic evolutionists, I'm on the outs with the materialistic evolutionists, and then the young earth fundamentalist creationists, they don't seem to have much use for me in intelligent design either. So it's
you can't win.
Base of support has proven a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, chimerical. That just shows me that you can't win for losing. So you must be onto something because you confound people on all sides of the issue. I want to ask about some specific elements in your field or in intelligent design. But first of all, where would you, just to speak generally, and maybe it's not a fair question, Bill, and if not, just reformulate it to what you think is manageable, but where would you, not to be too cute, where is the evolution of intelligent design in 2015, would you say? Because you certainly go back from many years, and you either know people personally and for a long time in the field or know of them. So I think I'm asking the right person this question.
Yeah, I mean, it's you raise a good question. I mean, where is the field? Because in a sense, I think you can place the origin of the modern intelligent design movement in the mid-'80s to early '90s. I mean, I think there were Thaxton Bradley Olson, Mystery of Life's Origin, was a book published in '84. Michael Denton, Evolution of Theory in Crisis, molecular biologist, wrote that in '85. And then Philip Johnson, Darwin on Trial. I think that circle of books and ideas and people, I think, really starts the movement. It starts more as a critique of existing evolutionary and origin of life materialistic scenarios. Then I'd say in the late '90s we get more of a positive formulation. My book, Design Inference, with Cambridge University Press, Michael Behe, Darwin on Darwin's Black Box. And so you have, I think, ideas that start getting developed, but also get short-circuited. I mean, you were involved with my whole controversy at Baylor University trying to get an intelligent design think tank research center going at Baylor, and you read that this was the first intelligent design think tank. It's also the last. It's been 15 years, and there's still no university that has sponsored an intelligent design group. I think the 2005 Kitzmiller v. Dover trial, in which the school board decided to push an intelligent design textbook called Of Pandas and People, they left themselves open to an ACLU suit. It was, I think, the rule that the law that they had instituted or policy was ill-conceived, and I think that hurt us. I mean, I think people like to be associated with winners. I mean, right. We just got through the NCAA. I mean, I'm sure Duke has a lot of new fans and followers. Because people like winners, and so I think we've taken some hits in terms of the public perception of intelligent design. For me, that just got me working harder on the theoretical foundations, and that's where my work with Bob Marks and the Evolutionary Informatics Lab was started focusing. But you yourself were involved with that in 2007, 2008, as Bob Marks's lab was removed from Baylor and the server. And so you had so you were about that, and then also you were there when he was interviewed for Expelled, this film with Ben Stein on intelligent design. So that film, I think, documentary, I'm not sure that we've seen that much movement since, at least in the U.S. If anything, I think there's been a hardening of positions by the people in power in the academy and in the intellectual world. I think it used to be that they would try to engage us. We'd be doing debates and things like that. I think that happens much less. I mean, and you saw this, excuse me, you saw this with my talk at the University of Chicago and Leo Kadanoff. I mean, it's only because Leo knows me and respected my work for him as a student way back that he invited me and did so over the objections of Jerry Coyne. I think a lot of people would have just folded and would have rescinded my invitation, and I think that's what's been happening. So I may be more negative than some. If you were to call the Discovery Institute, they might tell you something different. But I think 15 years ago, I thought that by the time I hit 65, intelligent design will be the dominant position, that Darwinism will bite the dust. I'm now going to be 55, so it's about 10 years, but I'm not that confident about it. On the other hand, I saw what happened with the Soviet Union in the 80s. I mean, early 80s, it looked as though it would continue forever and be this juggernaut, and by 1989, the Berlin Wall was coming down. So I think the theory itself is in bad shape. The evidence, I think, just keeps going against it, especially from molecular biology, because the complexities there just keep increasing, and basically Darwinian theory and its modern formulations, they still have to run everything through the natural selection. I mean, that's the designer substitute. And it has deep problems, and it's not explaining what we find in biology.
Why don't you elaborate just for a minute, and then I'd like to go off on a tangent about where intelligent design is. But why is it that, or how, perhaps, is a better question, how is it that natural selection is increasingly unable to explain these things? Is it because when we go to the molecular level, we see cells which look like a variety of different factories and almost designed robots and that type of thing?
Well, that certainly is part of it. I mean, I think perhaps the best metaphor to describe a cell these days is as an automated city, because you need what do you need in a city? I mean, you need garbage collection, you need food supplies being brought in, you need a whole array of transportation, distribution, information processing systems. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. So you have all these things that are going on there, and so I think and even the minimal cell is going to require that. So how do you get the first cell, I think, becomes a real problem. And Darwinian theorizing doesn't really explain that. Now, once you have an initial cell, Darwinian theorizing is supposed to explain how you can get increasing complexity of life. But even there, you've got tremendous problems. And the thing is, it's just that if you try to understand life in broadly evolutionary terms, it seems that living things are doing things that are just non-Darwinian. So when I was speaking at the University of Chicago in last year, one of the people at the talk was James Shapiro, who takes a view. He's written Evolution, a View from the 21st Century, in which, I mean, he's thoroughly non-Darwinian, and he'll say, look, I mean, organisms are doing their own, what he'll call natural genetic engineering. They're not just responding to environmental stimuli and trying to survive. They're doing creative things to adapt to the environment in ways that are fundamentally non-Darwinian. So if you go online if you look on, do a Google search on the third way of evolution, you'll find a whole community of biologists that are saying we're not going to be creationists. That's not scientific, but we're not going to be Darwinian. In fact, when I was talking to James Shapiro in his office after I gave my talk, I was trying to at least say, well, I think Darwin at least had some valid insights. I think that natural selection, actually, when you model it in terms of some sort of evolutionary algorithm on a computer, it offers some interesting search optimization approaches. But when I said something like that to James Shapiro, he dismissed it. He thought that Darwin across the board was bad news for biology.
Wow.
So he was even more anti-Darwinian. You should get him on the program.
Right. Well, we should have you both on for an extended discussion. It would be fascinating. That's interesting, Bill, because that doesn't seem to be bleeding out into the larger culture, that there are non-ID, non-creationist, substantive, thoroughgoing, serious, sober, scientific challenges to the Darwinian model. It's this black and white type of thing that we've been used to, I think, for so long, which, of course, only it's the end result of polarization. And I think from the materialist viewpoint, as you've said, there's no think tank. The public dialogue is reduced. Thank goodness for your friend at the University of Chicago who didn't fold. All we hear from the front lines of colleges these days are, canceling a Jan Hersey Ali's, honorary degree or shutting down speeches because some snowflake might have their feelings hurt. It's remarkable. I just, in any event, let me ask you about something that I thought was fascinating. I think it's been out a few years now. I don't know how long. I don't know if it's as old as 2010 or maybe 2011. But for listeners, a very famous and well-known philosopher, Thomas Nagel, came out with a book, only 128 pages, called Mind and Cosmos. And, Bill, I thought the reaction to that book made, the Jerry Coynes of the world's reaction to your appearance at the University of Chicago seem like a firecracker compared to, a warehouse of TNT. And to put it, simply, Nagel remains a committed atheist and a materialist, but he was trying to feel his way along the lines of a materialist-only approach to explaining how we got here, who we are, evolution, the whole Megillah. And in the introduction, said some kind words about people in the design theory who said, and he didn't necessarily agree, but what he basically said, and correct me if I'm not getting it correct, exactly right, Bill, he basically said you don't have to agree 100% in order to appreciate the value that they're doing, because materialism, as we currently understand it, is insufficient to explain consciousness. It's insufficient to explain mind, and maybe there will be almost another dimension of knowledge and understanding that will come to the rescue. But for current purposes, he said the materialist approach was coming up empty-handed.
Well, that's right. I mean, and Nagel, he is a huge, towering figure in philosophy. I mean, when I was a graduate student, everybody had read his essays and books, and View from Nowhere, and What's It Like to Be a Bat. So he's a big figure. He's in his 70s now. And as you say, he's an atheist. Now, I want to be careful here to distinguish materialism from naturalism. He is not a materialist in the sense of a materialist reductionist where everything can be reduced to material entities and their interaction and the patterns that are emerge out of that. He thinks that there's something richer to nature than that. And yet he's not willing to go the theistic route. He thinks that basically nature has some sort of built-in teleology, and he even will refer to teleological laws that he's trying to understand, which is actually very interesting because when I first read that teleological laws in his book, I dismissed it because I've heard of people talking about teleological laws in the self-organizational world.
And could you just explain that for our listeners, Bill? What do you mean when you say, we know, but teleological laws?
Teleological refers to end-directed or goal-directed, and so it's laws that will take you to a goal. The idea with materialism is that there are no goals in nature. It's just you've got matter is this big shmoo, and it organizes itself according to various ways, but there's nothing that it's striving towards. It's not going any place. It's just matter arranges and rearranges itself. And so to have some sort of telos where, there's an end to the, let's say, matter organizing itself into a living form, and that's somehow built into the world. From a materialistic vantage, there's no reason that life should be here at all. I mean, Stephen Jay Gould would talk about this, why are we here? Because of thousands of accidents. I mean, that's basically what you're stuck with. There's some sort of physical necessity and chance and their operation together, and that's what accounts for everything. And so Nagel is proposing something more than that. He sees nature as being a richer set of possibilities. But as you note, he's not an atheist. And so, right, I mean, consciousness, mind, and origin of life, he sees those as beyond the remit of purely materialistic processes. And you see scientific evidence bearing on that. And that's one reason he was lifted his hat to the intelligent design movement. Not that he buys the whole intelligent design program, but he thinks at least we brought up some valid criticisms and problems with Darwinian theory, and so he gave us credit for that. But yeah, I think he at least opens the door to the sorts of things we're doing, and has been, very congenial. I mean, my book, Being as Communion, there are about 2 chapters devoted to engaging with his work, and we in fact had an email correspondence, and I quote him there from one piece of our correspondence with his permission, because I thought he said there something better than he put it better than he did in his book. So that's, he's, and I think, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, as we see defections like this and people becoming who honest thinkers who say, look, I mean, this materialistic approach doesn't work. I wonder if there may come a shift at some point. I think one thing we have to realize is, I mean, this Darwinian materialism is as fundamentalistic as the young Earth creationism. I mean, it's offering a very simple storyline, and this is the appeal of fundamentalism. We're going to give you something very simple, bite-sized, and you can swallow it and you can disseminate it. It's just natural selection, filtering these different variations. That's how we get it all. For the young Earth creationist, it's just a knee-jerk, literalistic interpretation of Scripture, and everything is fine after that. And you don't have to think anymore after that. You can get on with life. And the idea that the world may be a more complicated place, and that things may not all be clear, and that alternative views that we may not like may still have a place at the table. In the classical liberal tradition of a John Stuart Mill, that just seems increasingly unacceptable to people these days. And I see it as a fundamentalist dynamic, and I see it in a lot of different guises.
How then, going forward, do you overcome it? You and Professor Marks and other thinkers at the Discovery Institute, which is in Seattle, radio talk show host Michael Medved frequently showcases people from the Discovery Institute, given that he's located in Seattle. Is it just the sort of thing that you've been doing, sometimes with a higher profile and sometimes with a lower profile, in as you said, looking at the what was that phrase? The theoretical foundations of intelligent design through the lab and Professor Marks, and do you get responses outside of your area to that work that you do, which is on a high level and strictly scientific, strictly computational and mathematical? Well,
I think we do get some people who are interested in the work, but and there's several things going on. I mean, Discovery Institute started out as a high-tech public policy research think tank, and so they their approach with intelligent design has been two-pronged. I mean, one is the cultural element. How are these ideas playing out in culture, and trying to get some fairness to the discussion these ideas and the implications of intelligent design. The other thing is actually to develop it as a scientific research program. And so they've been committed to both sides of that. I think for my own sanity, it's helped just to be focusing more, at least in the last 5 to 10 years, on the scientific underpinnings of intelligent design and let go of the cultural, because I used to be more of a cultural warrior. I had a blog, and I'd just get into it with people on the other side. And eventually I just wearied of that. So I think for me it's put my nose to the grindstone and do the work and just keep going at it. But, it's I think in some ways it can be disheartening to see the reaction to this because, the Evolutionary Informatics Lab is still not on the Baylor server. And then you have, there's a digital evolution lab, I think, at Michigan State University with millions of dollars of funding from the National Science Foundation. And they're basically trying to justify evolutionary theory. We've analyzed their models. I think we've refuted many of them. And yet they have all this public funding, and they can just keep going on their merry way. And if our work is inconvenient to them, they can blithely ignore it, and the world goes on. So it's I think there's a problem with intelligent design that there isn't so much in economics. In economics, if you have a bad economic model and you apply it, witness the meltdown with the mortgage-backed securities, reality will come and bite you in the rear end at some point. With intelligent design, it's a theoretical argument in some ways about where, we're dealing with the complexity of life. We've got butterflies and neat things like that to explain. But I explain it in terms of design. You explain it in terms of some sort of random process. Either of us can prove us wrong. Well, I think we've got the better argument, but there was this great New Yorker cartoon back in the 50s where it's you've got a wonderful case, Mr. Pitkin. Now, how much justice can you afford? Well,
that's a good one. That's a good one. So it's the way of all flesh, I'm afraid. That's how much justice can you afford? That's exactly right.
So it's I think our budgets are much more limited than our adversaries. So I sometimes see us in terms of a Gideon's band. Don't have that many. The incentive structure is all in favor of the other side. If you want to get a nice cush research position, endowed professorship, or just get stroked by the academy, go after, beat up on some intelligent design guy or intelligent design theory.
Right.
But turn the tables. It doesn't work that way on our end.
Yeah. It's a rather cheap approach, isn't it? Cheap grace or something. Well, don't you think it's the case, Bill, given the mismatch in resources and the grossly unlevel playing field just in terms of public perception and understanding, which is probably secondary matter, don't you think that it's things like your appearance at the University of Chicago or the publication of Thomas Nagel's Mind and Cosmos that really has the effect of moving that needle somewhat? Because both of those instances or both of those examples, you could argue, represent a breakthrough. Nothing has been done like, Thomas Nagel's. It's not this huge book, but it had quite an impact, both within philosophy and outside, as you well know. And isn't the howling of the Jerry Coynes of the world indicative of a certain measure or a certain modicum of progress?
Yeah, I would say it's an indication of progress, but as you say, modicum, and how do you measure that? I think often there are threshold effects, though, and critical masses that need to be reached. And with my talk at University of Chicago, I met with lots of faculty after my talk in their offices, talked with them. It was congenial. It looked like maybe, hey, there might be opportunities for collaboration. but nothing has become of that. So it's hard for me to say just how much of an impact this makes. I think we have to keep trying. But I remember when Anthony Flew, converted to deism. It was a theistic position. It wasn't Christianity per se, but he was prior to Dawkins, he was the best-known academic, intellectual atheist in the English-speaking world, and so that was a big deal. But New York Times dismissed it as Flew in his dotage. He's
right.
He got subverted by some Christians, and now is spouting this theistic intelligent design line. And it was actually intelligent design arguments, I think, more perhaps at the level of cosmology than biology. Actually, both were involved, I think, for him, that suggested that there had to be an intelligence behind the world.
Right.
So, it's hard to say. I remember one colleague of mine, David Berlinski, he was years ago describing how there was a reading group. Berlinski is a critic, skeptic of Darwinian evolution. He said there was a reading group at MIT, but none of them would go public. This is of MIT faculty, but they wouldn't, they wouldn't let it be known. So I think there's a lot going on underground. But if you have to face the vituperation and anger of a Jerry Coyne, where somebody will just take you on.
Yeah, it's vicious. It's vicious.
I mean, if you're a typical academic, why do you want to deal with that?
That's right.
Just keep your head down and do your stuff, and So I think it's tough. It's tough for these ideas really to break out in a way where people will say, hey, these intelligent design people are onto something. We really need to give them a hearing because there will be such a backlash.
I remember early on meeting you and learning about everything just as quickly as I could, probably a mile wide and an inch deep, but still, I was trying. And I remember you saying early on that you were ready to lead the charge with help of others, of putting Darwin in history's trash bin. And I thought, wow, that's a lot to bite off and chew. But I admired that you set your aim so high, and it's been interesting over these years to see the progression of that effort in ways that you, and certainly not I, could never have predicted. The twists and the turns, the ups and the downs, the experience at Baylor, everything all wrapped up. It's been remarkable watching you live out your public life and have some genuine difficulties because of the backlash and the attitude that people will take, and some of your critics are I don't even know if the word unprofessional is quite sufficient to cover that waterfront, because I smiled when you said just a little bit ago that you thought the Darwinianism, neo-Darwinian theory, was just as good an example of fundamentalism as anything else. And it's that extreme fundamentalist overreaction to you over the years that I have seen, sometimes up close, sometimes at somewhat of a remove, that has fascinated me, because the saying goes that you don't get flack unless you're over the target. And there's something, I think, to your efforts over the years. And it may be, Bill Dembski, that you won't see it in your lifetime, and here's hoping for another 50 years, or at least something where you're still compos mentis. And it may be that it will be history that vindicates you and your other thinkers, or you'll have half a win. You never know what's going to be coming down the pike to augment your approach. It seems to me from what you've been saying to our audience today that the Darwinian theory itself is something that you can just stay out of its way, because it's falling apart on its own terms. Otherwise, there wouldn't be that third wave of evolution.
Well, I think that's right, but inertia can be a very strong force in its own right, and I think that's I think, partly what we face. So that you have this theory that has all the problems, and yet the alternatives are unthinkable for many people, and so they just persist with this moribund theory. For my part, it's funny to hear you say trash bin of history. I'm sure I used those terms or put it in those terms
pretty close
way back. But
pretty
I think a lot of that triumphalism is gone from me now. I mean, not that I think we have the better argument. But
yes.
Again, it's that there's more to getting an idea out and accept it than just the merits of the argument.
That's right. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you. David Berlinski came to the Twin Cities when he was on his book tour of The Devil's Delusion. Right. And he wrote that more or less in response to Richard Dawkins' The God Illusion. And he was at some building on the University of Minnesota, very large campus. I don't go there often because it's sort of education on a scale that is off-putting to me, but each to their own. That's where he was. And there was a decent crowd for him. And in the audience was another Darwinian extremist, P.Z. Myers. And the interchange between the two was something to behold. I knew who had the finer mind. And afterwards, though, people were clustering around as is its wont after these sort of things. And I introduced myself as your attorney. And he sort of cocked his head thinking, well, he hadn't looked crazy heretofore. And he said, well, I suppose even Bill deserves a lawyer. So you've got that much going for you, Bill, that, in this system of ours, even you are deserving of legal representation. Even though I don't practice anymore, it was startling at the time because that was the depth of the animosity. And with PZ, who teaches, he's at Mankato, isn't he, in Minnesota? I think he's at the University of Minnesota at Mankato.
One of the University of Minnesota campuses.
Yeah, I think he's at Mankato. He's not in the Twin Cities. And he's, a name. I think his profile is maybe not what it used to be, but he says, ridiculous and crazy things too as well. I think only underlining that notion of fundamentalism. And I think when people understand that Darwinism as currently proffered to the culture at large is simplistic, is a soundbite, and is a sort of fundamentalism, then there'll be enough intellectual and cultural space for other ideas to be given respectful hearing, which I think since the time I've known you is all that you've ever wanted, is a respectful hearing of competing ideas, and let's argue it out. It's sort of three-dimensional chess. And if they have a good move, then you need to sit back and think it through with Professor Marx or others and try to account for this or that. It seems to me that would be one definition of the highlight of the life of the mind. And, of course, that's all very highfalutin, but it comes down to, as you say, the lived life, to quote Henry James, and getting through. And people are human beings, and they have families or relationships, and they need to put bread on the table, and there's only so much risk that people will take in any given situation. And so you magnify that. And I suppose in some ways, Bill Dembski, it's to your credit and others that you've made as much progress as you have. Yeah.
No, I think it's remarkable that we've, not just myself, but my colleagues, given how small our band is in terms of numbers and how little we've had in the way of resources, I think it's remarkable the impact we've had. But as you say, I think I would put it in terms of, I'd like a place at the table, but I think that's precisely what is being resisted. It's that we get marginalized. I spoke to a fellow that I've known at the Templeton Foundation for years and years. I hadn't seen him for probably about a decade. And it came up just why, I think I haven't been invited to one of their events in years and years. I got a $100,000 book grant from them back around 1999. It was actually for this book, Being as Communion. It took a while to get it done. But, anyway, and he put it in these terms. He said, the problem is that there would be these other people. It's like my daughter at a birthday party. If I invite this person, then so and so is not going to come. So
right.
It's just a question of setting up the guest list, and the problem is if intelligent design people are on the guest list, other people that they want are not going to be there. And so it's I think that's the mentality. And so what do you do with that? I think, again, for my own sanity, I just have to do my work and not worry about these things.
Right. No, that's exactly right. Well, Bill Dembski, thank you for taking the time to come on the program and to discuss a wide variety of what you've been doing these many years. One admonition to you, my friend, I checked, and through the miracle of Wi-Fi, you last tweeted on March 9th, 2013. And that might be, that's a while, a little more than 2 years, and it might be, worth your time. I know our mutual friend Denise O'Leary tweets a little more frequently when she will post at the Design Inference website. Speaking of resources, Bill, if listeners would like to learn more about you, is there a website, or is it just into the Google Mall, William Dembski or Bill Dembski? I'm looking for things that are an accurate portrayal of your work. I don't want them to go to Jerry Coyne.
Right.
They can if they want. Obviously, everything should be looked at from all these varieties. We're not trying to suggest otherwise. But if people had an initial appetite that's been whetted by this program, where would you recommend they would go?
I think the bestschools.org interview with me. So if you just punch an interview in Dembski in Google, that will take you there. I think that'll be a good place to start. And then I have a personal website called designinference.com. So if you go to that, many of my writings are there. Although I haven't updated it for about a year or two, I really need to get back to that. But that's probably those two places would probably be the best to start. And then I've been a fellow for going on 20 years with Discovery Institute, Seattle's Discovery Institute, and so I'm part of the Center for Science and Culture there, and so you can find stuff about me there as well as about my colleagues, so you get a sense of the broader community of the intelligent design movement.
And that would be discovery.org, is that correct?
Right, yeah.
Discovery.org. Okay.
And /CSC. But once you're on the Discovery site, you'll be able to find. There are various number of initiatives there, and you'll want the Center for Science and Culture. That's the arm of the Discovery Institute that's focused on intelligent design.
Great. Well, Bill Dembski, my friend, thank you so much for coming on Gilmore and Glahn. This has been an excellent opportunity to catch up and to review, and we'll be looking forward. Maybe we can have you on in another year and see what has happened in the meantime. This has been another episode of Gilmore and Glahn, coming to you from the Twin Cities Newstalk.com, the studios of KTLK Radio, AM 1130. Thank you for listening, and join us next week. Thank you again, Bill.